This is test 65, section 4, question number 7. And it says, the ruins of the prehistoric Bolivian city of Tiwanaku feature green andesite stones weighing up to 40 tons. These stones were quarried at Copacabana, which is across a lake and about 90 kilometers away. You know, I'm actually going to stop there. You thinking anything at this point?
Yeah, so initially I was just kind of imagining these big stones sitting amongst ruins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, hey, they were quarried from across a lake about 90. So, in other words, far away and over water. And I'm like, okay, so it already feels like this is going to get into some sort of mystery about how the heck did these heavy stones get over here? That's what I'm guessing.
Yep. And I think the mistake that people make is they're like, andesite, I don't know what that is. Tiwanaku, I
Yeah,
don't know
I
how to
don't know
even
what that
say
is.
that.
Yeah,
Copacabana, where, what, who? And
yeah.
they're getting caught up in details of shit they don't understand. And instead, Ben is imagining a giant green heavy ass block being transported 90 kilometers over water. And he's immediately
Mhm.
going, huh, wonder how they did that.
Yep.
Archaeologists hypothesize that the
Mm.
stones were brought to Tiwanaku on reed boats.
Okay.
Ben is he's primed for that because he predicted that. He predicted like, well, they're probably going to talk about how the hell they got these 40-ton stones 90 kilometers across a lake.
Yeah.
So, and that's a reading comprehension tip, right? Is to predict what you're going to read next. So you
Hmm.
did predict and you were right. So you're primed to receive this new information that, oh yeah, we are talking about this hypothesis from some archaeologists who think that they were brought there by reed boats. What do you think about
And
reed boats?
I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking of those like, you like strap these reeds together,
Yep.
and I'm like, really? For a 40-ton fucking rock is sitting on top of a reed boat?
Right.
Like maybe they made some fucking amazing reed boats, but right
Yep.
now I'm like, I am having trouble seeing your
Yeah.
hypothesis.
Which is, yeah, and I think that's correct. You're going, wow, those would be some bitchin' reed boats. Like that's pretty sweet for prehistory. This was a
Yeah.
prehistoric Bolivian city.
Hmm.
Dang, reed boats. To show this was possible, experimenters transported a 9-ton stone from Copacabana to Tiwanaku using a reed boat built with locally available materials and techniques traditional to the area. Period. That's it. So, what do we think of the researchers' hypotheses? What do you think about how they've tested these hypotheses?
I'm trying to figure out whether my son can pick up these weights. So I'm going to give him a weight that's a quarter of the size and see if he can do that. Like, right? Like, if he
Yeah,
could do the quarter, then he could probably do the weight that's four
yeah,
times heavier.
yeah.
What the
Um,
fuck?
Nonetheless,
Sure.
you should be able to sort of make both arguments, right? So I like that.
Yeah.
You're like,
Mm-hmm.
well, hold on a second. These were stones were up to 40 tons,
Yep.
but you only did a 9-ton stone. That's only a quarter of the weight. But what's the other argument?
The other argument is they did it.
It's a
It's
9-ton
possible.
stone,
Still very heavy. Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, your whole
Um,
objection of like, what? Reed boats? No way.
mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
they in fact did transport a 9-ton stone using a reed boat.
Yeah.
So it might not prove that they could carry a 40-ton stone.
True. I'm still kind of I agree it's providing some evidence. At the same time, I'm still like, man, that 4 times heavier, that
Hmm.
could be enough to sink the ship.
Sure. And if one of us was a lawyer for one side and the other one was a lawyer for the other side, we would have a spirited debate about what this really means, and we would either easily be able to like switch teams and still make the arguments on the other side, right?
Hmm.
That's really how you should be tackling these arguments. Okay. So the question then says, which one of the following would be most useful to know in order to evaluate the support for the archaeologist's hypothesis?
Hmm.
Any thoughts about that question, STEM?
Yeah. So this is asking us, what would you want to know? Not that we're necessarily going to tell you. We're just saying what information, if you did end up finding it out, would be helpful. It's a little different than, say, like a strengthen or a weaken question, but it is related to that.
Yeah, it's you could call it an evaluate question,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, which one of these five is a good question to ask? Which one of these five matters if we're trying to figure out whether the support for the hypothesis, which by the way was this thing that they did with the 9-ton
Mm-hmm.
stone,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they used locally available materials, they used techniques traditional to the area. Which one of these is a good question to ask if we're trying to evaluate whether their experiment actually justifies or actually does tend to support their hypothesis?
I have two questions right now.
Okay.
My first question is the one that I've been ranting about, which is, okay, well, if you can do it for 9 tons, can you do it for 40? Is there
That's a
some way to
great
figure that
question.
out?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The second question I have, now that like it's specifically asking me to evaluate the support for the hypothesis, I'm looking back at the support and it says using a reed boat built with locally available materials and techniques traditional to the area. I guess it's like, it's almost like the LSAT's inviting us to kind of look at that like specific stuff. And I'm like glad that they're using things that are available. It'd be weird if they had used stuff that was from
Totally.
somewhere else. It'd
Oh
be
yeah,
like,
we
okay,
imported this stuff from Mexico, and yeah, that wouldn't be good.
that would be good. But the one thing they didn't really kind of make clear to me was whether this stuff was available prehistorically. I mean, gosh, how
Yeah,
long ago was this? So I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about
I
like the
love that
time.
second objection or that second question, which was, yeah, these are locally available materials now,
Mm-hmm.
but were these reeds actually even locally available in prehistory?
Yeah.
Real good question
What
to
if,
ask.
yeah.
If they were, it makes the argument better. If they weren't, it makes the argument far worse.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you know it's a good question to ask. Okay,
Yeah.
so A says whether the traditional techniques for building reed boats were in use at the time Tiwanaku was inhabited.
Oh, so that's like a variation of what we were just talking about. I was thinking
Sure
about the
is.
materials themselves, but this is actually referring to the techniques. They said they use techniques traditional to the area, but just because they're traditional techniques, like how long ago? Since the 60s?
Right. Oh,
So
totally.
or prehistoric times. I mean, God, that was so long ago. Yeah, so I would keep this one open. I'd want to know if they were available back then.
Seems like a great question to ask. If the answer to A is no, it makes the argument look far worse. If the answer to A is yes, it makes the argument better.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like that's a necessary assumption of their argument,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so necessary assumptions are points of weakness. And we could be arguing about that. If we were lawyers on the opposite sides of this argument, we would love to argue about that.
Yeah.
B says whether green andesite stones quarried at the time Tiwanaku was inhabited were used at any sites near Copacabana.
I don't I don't really care if they were great. If they What does that tell me about their ability to be transported elsewhere? Just
Nothing.
And if they weren't, then okay, they could be transported, but where?
It's a fact that the stones were quarried at Copacabana.
Yeah.
So if they built using some of those stones next to Copacabana, nice. If they didn't, who cares? It just doesn't
Yeah.
do anything. It has nothing to do
Yeah.
with whether they were able to use reed boats to transport these things across the lake. C, whether reed boats are commonly used today on the lake.
I don't care about today.
No, they've got fiberglass now. They've got steel now. They've got whatever they've got now. Who gives a shit? If they still use traditional reed boats, nice. If they don't, whatever. They've moved on to better shit. Who cares? It doesn't have anything to do with whether they did this transportation that we're talking about in
Yeah.
prehistory. D says whether the green andesite stones at Tiwanaku are the largest stones at the site.
What if there were bigger ones? That doesn't answer the question as to how these were transported.
Yeah, if they had giant granite boulders that weighed 400 tons that were quarried there in Tiwanaku, that doesn't change my assessment of whether these green andesite stones came over by reed boat. Just don't care. E, whether the reed boat built for the experimenters is durable enough to remain usable for several years.
Maybe they transported them and it literally disintegrated after they did.
Yeah, it could have
You
been a
wouldn't care.
one-time use reed boat, or it could have been 1,000-time use reed boat. Who cares?
Was it created by Elon Musk and he made it a reusable rocket,
Yeah.
a reusable reed boat, or was it made by somebody else?
The answer is
Trump.
A here because when the answer to A is yes, then it helps the argument. Basically, it makes a necessary assumption of the argument explicit. And when the answer
Yeah.
to A is no, it devastates the argument. That's how necessary assumptions tend to work. The opposite of a necessary assumption kills the argument. So A is a good thing to fight about, and that's why the answer is A.